this is the first time where you had a significant funding that was available for a technology to grow in such a remarkable way without having that found its uses.
I would equate it with saying it's the train versus the self-driving car. Because if you just think about automatic processes, it's like a train, right? It takes you from A to B, but you can't deviate from the path.
On the loop and on the design board, I think that it's important to keep humans not only doing the design, but also accountable for design.
Hello, my name is Jesper Schleimann. I'm the AI officer for SAP in the EMEA region. And this is AI Voices. So welcome, Russ. Welcome, Michael. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of AI Voices. And maybe to kick us off, before we move to the future and the great expectations of this technology of AI, I'd love to deep dive a little bit on current expectations, or let's say current results. How have you been seeing this, Russ?
Well, I've been seeing it in multiple places. If we take it at different levels, from a company perspective, it's an interesting place that we're in, which is the question we now ask is, where is AI not used? Whereas before it was, where is it used? It's really pervasive across R&D, production, commercialization, and then transportation and distribution, which of course, you put all that together, that's got to mean accelerated medicine, which can only be a good thing. And at a workforce level, making our entire workforce AI literate and providing the tools so that they can become much more effective and efficient and productive is the norm now. And it's the expectation of the workforce as well. So we're in a very good place, I feel.
I think it's a great point, the expectation of the workforce, right?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here, and I'll bring Bob Solo's 1997 quote that you see computers everywhere but in productivity statistics. And I think that we may be in a similar place when it comes to AI. You see it everywhere, certainly in corporate announcements, not always in corporate deployment. You see it in terms of the public discourse, but you don't yet see any meaningful economic impact. And even in my conversations with big tech, there is an angst of, can we show the use cases in terms of impact? So I will agree, there is a lot of excitement and a lot of advance in terms of the excitement about deploying. I think that there is a significant heterogeneity. There's a few firms that are leading the way and are truly transforming their workplaces. There's others that have corporate communications that speak about AI and use it to edit documents, but not much more. And then there's many organizations that are trying to figure it out, especially somewhere in the middle. In terms of the deployment, I think that there are some interesting organizations that are deploying it, and usually not the larger ones, but small ones that build their processes around AI, if you think about the corporate deployment. But I don't think that it has had an impact yet. Now, the word yet is important, and we'll see what the future holds.
I mean, for me, it's pretty natural when you have a new technology, as always, it enters into the current state of doing things. So you use it kind of side by side. And then over time, the way you work transforms to match the new technology. But this will always take time because we are still living in an analog world as humans, and it still requires humans. But it doesn't mean necessarily there won't be cases. In particular, if you combine the insights of third generation AI with the context of business and put inside the business processes, orchestrate the right way with the right data, then I think we're seeing the unlock, right? When we have it more embedded in processes where value is already generated, when you add it in an existing process. But does that meet the expectations of where the market is? Probably not yet. But I think we're heading there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's tasks that are within processes that are ripe for AI. They will improve productivity and free up time to go elsewhere. But to your point, how do you measure productivity? How do you get ROI? You can't do that in a minute, because it's not like you'll save 10% of your day and then you can suddenly get your money back on that. So what does the employee do in the other 10% of the day? Right? That's very difficult. The other way I would look at it is just embedding AI in existing processes isn't going to be massively transformative. You need to redesign your process to what AI can do rather than just accept it. Because then you've effectively got, 5-10 years ago, robotic process automation or something like that. But finding that sweet spot's going to take time, and it'll be different for every organization, I'd say.
Absolutely. And I think that we have a technology that has not developed with a solution in mind. And if you put it in historical perspective, this is unique. Usually, money exists to fund technologies because you think of specific downstream users and you start with things that are interesting and exciting. It isn't just pure technological opportunity, it is the way that you use it downstream. This is the first time where you had a significant funding that was available for a technology to grow in such a remarkable way without having that found its use. Also, today, in terms of where the valuation is of all of these big firms that develop these technologies, there is a lot of money that has gone from the capital markets that has sustained massive losses in the development of technology. And now companies are told, look at these wonderful tools. And I agree, it's going to be different in different sectors. But this is potentially a paradigmatic shift, but it's a shift that we have not yet seen fully developed. We now have the first few instances of where AI has led to the process, but I'm curious to see as this technology matures and as it starts going to address a real issue, which isn't just that we have a sector that was already in a process of dealing with the fact that the research productivity was going down. Where is it that you're most excited if you think about?
For me, there isn't an area I'm not excited about. If I look across the entire value chain, I can only see upside from the use of these tools. I think the way I would look at it is if you make a big bet on one of these technologies, you're likely to find you've made the wrong choice within about 6 months. So you need to find a combination of technologies and don't bet on one, and allow yourself to go for a more open format approach so you can pivot and reuse that sort of AI wherever you wish you want to use it. And that for me is where AI is going to revolutionize our sector in the sense of the scale and speed that it can process and get insights from volumes
Just to
of data.
take a step back, because I think it's important to recognize where we are today. And I'm not sure all companies are at that very high maturity level. In particular, when I think about value with AI and alignment in terms of expectations, it doesn't follow a linear curve. Remember, all technology follows an exponential development curve, right? Which means that you have to have many iterations with subpar value delivery, at least in terms of expectations. But each iteration is slightly improving. And then towards, once you get momentum and scale, you need to build upon those. And that's why I think the embeddedness in standard processes, which gives us meaningful impact, at least, we can discuss whether it's big enough, is to create that momentum to get along that scale. And then connecting the dots was different compared to the RPA or automation type software. I would equate it with saying it's the train versus the self-driving car. Because if you just think about automatic processes, it's like a train, right? It takes you from A to B, but you can't deviate from the path. So it gives you value at scale, but you can't deviate. And the reality is, the reason the organizations exist is because of all of these long tail problems, right? But with AI, we have the opportunity not only to begin helping the driver, but also building a self-driving experience. And even moving beyond that, because once we get the hands off the steering wheel, the car run itself, it's not comparable to the train, because that car can then be orchestrated with other cars driving in sequence. And that can unlock whole new levels of productivity. So the perspective for me is quite different and quite more resilient.
Let me go to what you were just mentioning now, Jesper, which is to say that you will change the way that you organize, which is both cool and to some extent scary. And here's why. If I think about how, say, organizations in the healthcare sector are, they are some of the most R&D intensive organizations in the world, right? A very big percentage of their revenues is spent on R&D. But these ginormous budgets, if you look at them in dollar value, tend to be organized in fairly disciplined ways. You have therapeutical areas that then have ways in which they generated, whether these are people from a medical or a chemical background, or sometimes biotech, and put them through in the process. Now what you've got is the possibility of leveraging this technology, and this technology requires, as Jesper is saying, some investment before you even think about developing a drug, which means that you have a different funding model. So the question becomes to the organization, what is it that you're seeing in an organization when you've got this new technology that requires you to integrate it in new ways and has a different funding model, which is not necessarily aligned to the one that is in force? How does an organization such as yours deal with the fact that you've got this great new technology, it opens possibility, but at the same time, it requires you to tackle it in ways that are not necessarily compatible with capital allocation, the way that we organize? How do you deal with these tensions?
Well, that's where you need to reimagine how you're set up, right, as an organization. And very recently, in fact, we've done that. We've tackled that head on. So we've moved from an organization that had elements of AI in multiple functional areas, and of course within an IT function, and we've created a global enterprise AI function. The other way I would say up front to get the value out, and it is something that we have been doing, is you need to make sure that you don't release these tools to a workforce that doesn't understand how to get the maximum value out of it. So we invested very heavily in making a huge program of education available to the entire organization. So we rolled it out to the entire organization, tiered levels, and we have had, I think today, over 40,000 people access multiple levels of that. And based upon how far they get in that tiering, that unlocks access to certain tooling in the organization as well. And that's the way that you get value from it. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of money for an AI tool that you're probably giving your organization to play with, and they're probably using it as a slightly more intelligent Google. And if you don't do that, then you will be pouring money down the drain. So educating the workforce and ensuring that they get the maximum value out of the tools.
I think you're spot on, and as a technology provider and an AI provider, it's also one of the things we have to navigate, right? That the half-life of these models are less than 6 months, if even 3 months these days. So how do we build enterprise applications? How do we move towards an agentic enterprise? Knowing this, and still we know we have to tailor it to bring it into the right context. So one of the reasons we also provide more than 30 models and give that freedom of choice to our users is that sometimes one model fits better to a certain use case in, say, supply chain versus another model for coding versus another model for finance. And yet again, we also got to relax the connection and the hard connection between the models and the integrations you do to business processes in the wider context. So maybe we should transition a bit and talk about our future expectations to this technology, specifically maybe AstraZeneca, and how you see it, Michael. What's your view, and where can we go with this?
I feel that elements of the AI stack will start to become a commodity, whether that's compute, whether that's the model itself, and then the differentiator, I think, is going to be that application layer on top, which brings it all together. And that, for me, is the exciting part. Because if you've got that commodity level at the bottom, you can really start to create that specialized capability at the top, domain specific, use case specific. And that, I think, is really the next exciting level that we're going to see for this
move from general purpose technology to true purpose-built technology, right? And really change the way we work to truly accommodate for all the new opportunities that AI could provide.
One thing that will happen inevitably, given the amount of capex that has gone in, is that they'll say, blimey, I now need to, on the consumer side, start moving into making money from selling stuff, what Google has done, but now OpenAI will try to do that. Google will certainly try to do that. Others may try to do that as well. And on the B2B side, boy, I need to try to do things that innovate. And that takes me to a very interesting challenge, because it's both a great opportunity because you will now have a technology that is able to deliver, but that opens another question. Who the heck will deliver it? Because in addition to having existing companies like AstraZeneca that are going to say, great, this new technology opens a pathway. At the same time, we already know Sam Altman is offering a massively higher salaries to people in healthcare. Part of Oracle's move closer to Oxford than the Allison move is to connect to the existence of science and connect some of these big AI and big tech players closer to the domain expertise. So many bets may be actually off, which leads then you with an interesting question, which is how will you play when the division of labor starts being different? I think that there's going to be a potential change in terms of who does what, who innovates. Because if you say that we need now to leverage AI, well, it's great, but it's not going to be the exclusive province of the current players to innovate. There's going to be many more that will come saying, hey, if you're going to use this technology, look at us, the makers of technology. So, how do you think about this change in the landscape, the change of who is it who's going to be essentially playing your own game, but coming from a different background?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the industry as a whole, the roles of many players will be changing over the years. It has to evolve. I don't think that's any different to the natural sort of maturity, if you like, of a particular industry. And within that industry, who does what and the roles of the individuals will have to change as well. And that will be uncomfortable, I think, for quite a few people that have maybe spent the majority of their career doing X or Y, and now they have to do a Z that is a little bit of both, plus maybe something completely new. And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, but I think everybody will recognize the logic that effectively everyone's going to be doing something slightly different. It feels a little bit like the beginning of .com, where what's the internet going to do to me and my job, right? That's what happened. Maybe it's the same with the printing press. I'm not that old, I'm happy to say. But there will be change. It will be different in every industry, and it will take time, I think, to level itself out and find the right answer to that. And people, workforce, companies will have to adapt and adopt in some cases.
Yeah, for me, it's clear we are moving from models to meaning, from innovation to integration. Right. This is clear. This is also what is needed to truly get the next level of value unlock. Right. That you need to bring in the context of what we do, and we need to integrate it into how we do things, and we need to do this at scale. I think this is really the challenge. But once this is done, as you said, this allows us for a new way to operate, to find a new role for all of us.
At the same time, this also means that whereas we started with a, hey, look at this interesting technological change, not only do we need to rethink the organization, as you said, the fact that you guys have been successful was a function of the fact that you were explicitly focused on engaging people in the organization, and then also creating clear accountability, clear ownership, and clear momentum, so that the technological possibility is translated into actual business value, because it's not going to happen by itself. So the first thing that needs to happen is you need to think that the organization will not simply say, "Ooh, nice technology here, I'll gobble it up and it'll happen." It ain't going to work that way. No. It needs a lot of action and leadership, and I suspect we'll be looking at it. But the second thing that's happening, especially in these frontier sectors, is that there's going to be a heck of a lot of strategic transformation that will possibly affect the identity of what you do. So there's going to be an open question of, what do I do, and for what solutions do I need to create partnerships with my peers? So, for instance, in healthcare, I suspect we will see an even greater interest of some of the top pharmaceutical companies to say, we need to band together to get some of the technology sorted for all of our common sake, and also to protect our turf from the people who may want to come from tech. So that makes me wonder, who is it that has the ownership, and what is the nature of this conversation currently in the leadership teams of the large incumbents that need to navigate not only an organizationally complex, but also strategically dissing world?
You sort of tackled 2 points there. The partnership and the alliances within this industry have been going on for quite some time, and they have been increasing. You're absolutely right. I've certainly seen that in my time, and that's a necessity, I feel, because that's how you get the best outcomes in general, and that will continue. In terms of banding together, as you called it. There are consortium approaches and consortium plays that are happening, like you say, with providers of compute. We ourselves have a particular partnership in Sweden with NVIDIA and some other big Swedish companies, not in our industry, to make sure that we have access to that higher level compute for the ability to execute some really high end AI. That is absolutely the way that we're going. And in terms of your other question around partnerships in AI, I've seen a definite shift there, which is there has been a lot of partnerships between companies and AI providers in our space. That's now starting to shift a little. And in fact, recently, we actually acquired an AI company. So we moved from that partnership frontier into acquisition of talent and capability. Now, time will tell if that becomes the norm across the industry, because there's only a few that have done that. But that's the reality.
Yeah, because I think that is one fundamental question right now. How much should you build yourself? What's the right equation? How much should you consume from what your ecosystem delivers out of the box? And where should you extend? And where should you really develop on its core, like deep partnerships? For me, that equation, as always, if you are in the pharma industry, that's your core business, right? So for me, it would be maybe around 70-20-10. 70%, I think you should be expecting your core providers to deliver for you as standard out-of-the-box activation. And you can focus your time on extending and building your own, but only in 20% of the cases you would extend, and 10% you would focus on that bit. Because otherwise you get bogged down in a lot of technical challenges that not necessarily move the needle enough compared to where you're expected to innovate.
Well, as a technologist, my entire life, I think the buy versus build argument is enduring. There's never a right answer for that, and it's very emotional sometimes. But I still probably have the view that I had 10, 15 years ago, which is you only build where there is true competitive advantage and differentiation.
Yeah, definitely.
But knowing where that line is can sometimes be difficult, right? I will always be of the view that you buy a commodity. We've had that debate in the cloud. When do you move to the cloud, right? At the time, it was very scary, and then it became a commodity, and then it became where the expertise was. I think we're starting to have that as well now with AI, and in particular with open source models. At which point do you use an open source model, bring it in-house and train it on your specific domain, data, and use case versus using frontier models? I think that's a debate that is going to be very prevalent over the course of this year, especially as the data now clearly shows those models are nearly as fast.
Yeah, but I think it's a good point. I mean, even in our approach, we see certain use cases where open source models are more than good enough, more cost efficient, where 80% or 70% is more than fine. And others, let's say in deep specialized work or on high value work, you want the frontier model. So we need to have that flexibility in what we provide. And I think that's something that continuously moved. Also, it's a maturity question. One of the things that we're extremely focused on in SAP, I'd say, goes to the core of what we do, is to solve complex challenges at scale. And taking the AI that we love, and some of us love as a consumer space and a one-to-one, at a large scale. Think about things like grounding it to avoid hallucination, not just in hundreds, but thousands of documents and beyond. That's a very complex scaling challenge that we have to fix. And it's just now we are getting to a stage where we have the maturity to solve for these things at scale. So I think there wasn't maybe as much an opportunity to get things standard in the past as there is now. I think this is where we have to, as an industry, keep looking into if it's available as a standard, probably is it then good enough, or do I need to customize it and build my own, right? So maybe we talked a little bit about our expectations for the future. We talked about where we are today. I think that's a perfect segue to move on to leadership and the role of leadership in getting our organizations to that future.
Yes, I mean, it's very important for leaders to remain grounded in humanity. The workforce at the moment is very unclear and unsure about what AI means for them. And I think as leaders, we need to be reticent of that and sympathetic to that. The challenges that will come are largely around trust in the organization, trust in the AI, and importantly, in the ethics of the AI as well. That's a real problem that we need to address head on and ensure that we apply consistent policies and procedures when we introduce this form of technology into any business.
It's so easy to lose the trust of users, and trust is really the vector of AI, right? So I very much agree with that, and probably comes with a penalty of a little bit slower progress than we would like.
Yeah, I would say so. I think transparency is key as well in this whole debate. We publicly posted our ethics for AI back in 2021. I think we were one of the first in our industry to do so. And I think that is important because that creates the trust, not just internally, but importantly, externally as well. And once that trust is there, the adoption will start and then the benefits will flow accordingly.
The other element that you mentioned that I have found to be very important is the concern and reticence, because I think that fear of the technology and fear in a very deep human basis, something we'll discuss in another episode, is such an important anchor to the way that we interact with technology. How do you deal with it? Because whether we like it or not, and whatever people may say to keep a brave face, it drives them. And they're not going to be assuaged by techno-utopians that are often not even based in reality. They will feel the threat. They will feel the potential lack of meaning that the machine taking over means. It's very visceral. So how do you deal with it on a corporate level, and how do you deal with it as a leader?
Well, that fear often comes from, firstly, maybe a lack of understanding, and secondly, a lack of transparency from the organization. So I think it's really important that you remain, as I said earlier on, grounded in humanity as a leader, but also make it very clear how that technology can not just aid the individual, i.e. what's in it for me, but also how that's going to aid towards a very clear company strategy and an outcome, whether that be in an R&D sector or whether that be in a finance transformation sector. It really doesn't matter. If people understand what it is, why you're doing it, and you're entirely transparent around the capability and the reasoning, I think people will generally go for that. I mean, it's intrinsic for us as humans that we fear the unknown. So you need to remove that factor wherever you can and be very open and transparent with workforce for what it will mean for them.
For me, one of the unique things about this technology is that it allows us as humans, as employees and leaders, to move from operators to orchestrators. And this is where I think we have to go. So it's a mind shift in how you think about how you do work. Like, we all become leaders. And we as leaders have to help organizations think more like leaders, i.e. which decisions do I delegate and which do I stay in the loop on? Where am I needed? And where do I add a unique perspective? And I think this guidance, maybe also with a healthy portion of why, as you were saying, which I like very much, because if the why is clear, the how will find its way on a personal level. It's absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I think the concept of human in the loop is an interesting one, and it will evolve. So human in the loop absolutely has to be. But for everything?
No.
That's the question.
I agree.
So I think as humans using technology, an interesting question I ask myself is, we expect the technology to be perfect, but the human is never perfect. So I saw some data recently around self-driving cars, and the accident levels in those are way less than humans, but we expect absolute perfection. So what is good enough?
We hold it to a higher standard.
It's worse, actually. I think that it's not only do we expect perfection, but I think that we react viscerally on the fact that we cannot ascribe agency. But I'd like to broaden it up, because I think that in addition to saying that there needs to be a human in the loop, or to say that there's a bit of an issue because we're not ready to face statistical reality, and we would rather have the comfort of an individual making mistakes rather than a machine saving lives. I think that the challenge is for us to be responsible for the guardrails and the criteria that we set. So it isn't just the human in the loop, it's the human designer. In the same way that you would set criteria and boundaries and guardrails for your team, you need to set criteria and boundaries and guardrails for whatever processes are delegated, and you are accountable to them. So I think that it is almost tricky to speak about the human in the loop because it means there's someone doing exceptional management. And I think that that underplays the role of us as architects responsible for setting the same way that we set a set of humans making a job, a set of humans and automated decision processes or automated outputs, where you are responsible, an individual is responsible through the design work that they do for what comes as a collective. So I think it's a broader responsibility than the human simply checking the output. It's a human designing it, and that's our role.
The governance model becomes the operating model, so to speak, as we move forward, right? So very interesting around the role of leadership, and for sure challenges we have to think about as we evolve. And I do also agree that it has to start with the human in the loop, if nothing. Also to build the trust, to build the scale. We know we will fail. The technology is not perfect, and even is, as I believe, in many cases already better than human decisions. We have to be comfortable to learn to rely on it. And then we can more easily opt out and go human on the loop, right? Really, and delegate.
On the loop and on the design board, I think that it is important to keep humans not only doing the design, but also accountable for design. And I think that the question of accountability is going to be a really interesting
accountable
one.
For the architecture. And I like your architect. I mean, I think that analogy is perfect. We have to think more like architects going forward.
Well, if you think about ownership and architecture within the enterprise, it's a slight shift. So pre-AI, if you owned an end-to-end process, say procurement in an organization, you were accountable not just for the end-to-end design of the process, but the technology you use within that process. The difference now is the bits that were executed within that process by a human, you will now design which elements are potentially now executed by an agentic. So it's a similar thing, I think, to what you were saying, which is if you own that process and you previously chose the technology, it's up to you to decide as the owner of that process within your organization, which are the elements you would let agentic AI take over and when. And you would be accountable for that, in my opinion, because it's a decision, just like picking technology. So that is a change from a leadership perspective. I do think the leaders, though, in that example or any example, the need for them to actually understand the technology is important as well now. So as a leader, one of the challenges I see is that you have to stay on top and understand the capabilities and the limitations of that at a level you previously probably didn't have to.
Yes. I think it is unavoidable to have a strong AI literacy and understanding, even as a top leader, especially because it's moving over and taking over more and more business decisions. And the whole analytical decision layer is merging with the execution layer of processes. It makes it even more important that it's a strategic choices you're making in what you're doing with this technology. Thank you so much for joining this episode of AI Voices. And thank you to my guests, Michael, Ross.
Thanks
for being here
Pleasure
today.
to be here. Thank you.